Happy New Year, everybody! It's Thursday, January 2nd, 2020. Can you believe it? And you've reached the No Name Cinema Society, the film review show that dares to dig a little bit deeper. This is our classic movie discussion of our 59th set of episodes, also known as episode 59.3, where we're going to talk about Billy Wilder's Double Indemnity. It's our final classic of this, our fifth season. Hi, everybody. My name is Jonathan Betzler. I'm here back in my home in Los Angeles, and I'm excited to be with you here today. I got my buddy Bogey, who knows a little something about film noirs, like the one we're about to review. So I'm very excited. I got a couple other guys with me as well, some co-hosts here. First, ladies and gentlemen, our smart aleck everyman who's easily swayed by a pretty face and an anklet. Who else but Patrick Taylor?
Hey guys, what's up?
And also with us, ladies and gentlemen, a film investigator with a little man inside him that tells him when a film is a phony. Ryan Turner's back.
How's it going? Hey.
And the fun part about you guys is, I don't know if you remember, I think it's the first show you've done together, but all of us with one or two other guys went to see Spectre together at the Vista Theater several years ago.
Oh, wow.
4.5 years ago or so. I know you both through the same producer. The same producer that I met through my buddy Julian introduced me to Patrick first, and then right afterwards to Ryan. So you both know Raph, and that's my conduit to both of you. So you guys are connected in that way. It's kind of fun.
Yes, we're both lucky enough to never see Raph. Great.
Accurate. All right. Here's the schedule for this, the 59th set of episodes that we are in the middle of. It is our final set of episodes of our regular season, ending our fifth season, and it started with our annual Star Wars movie on December 26th. And continued on Monday, December 30th, with a review of the Indie Spotlight Downloading Nancy from 2009. Tonight, of course, is the classic movie discussion, Double Indemnity. And this upcoming Monday, January 6th, is our 43rd Sound Off, in which I'm going to have an announcement. I'm going to do a book review. Alex is going to do a second run, and I am to count down my top 5 Billy Wilder films of all time based on tonight's discussion of Double Indemnity. All right, guys, so that was our schedule for our 59th series of episodes. Patrick usually drinks with me. I don't know if he's going to drink with me today. I've got Sierra Nevada Celebration Fresh Hop IPA. Patrick, are you with me?
You know, I looked in the fridge and I didn't see any beer, and I just didn't want to go too hard and with the whiskey right now, you know. It's just after New Year. So I'm on a whole nother diet, you know.
Whole nother diet. All right. It's in New Year. Ryan, are you drinking with me?
I had a Thai iced tea right before.
Doesn't count. Well, cheers to the audience, and thanks for tuning in for this, our final classic of our fifth season. So trivia that we had for this particular episode, which I gave in the last episode, which was a review of the film Bang the Drum Slowly. I said it's a movie that featured the most famous anklet in movie history. Of course, that's the anklet that Barbara Stanwyck wears that catches the eye of Fred McMurray. And now, I don't know how anklets didn't become all the rage for years after that, but if they did, it didn't last because anklets aren't worn as much anymore. This film, of course, celebrated its 75th anniversary this past year, and so it's the perfect classic to close out our fifth season. Are you guys ready for some summary action?
Let's do it.
All right, so summarizing for our audience here, Double Indemnity. Insurance salesman Walter Neff is struck by Phyllis Diedrichson, the extremely sexy wife of a prospective client. Their flirtation escalates to the point where she intimates that she'd like to kill her husband and collect the insurance payoff. He rejects her at first, but the allure is too strong, and he succumbs to agreeing to help her commit murder. Now, this is a pretty famous movie, guys. I assume you guys had at least heard of this movie.
No.
Yep.
You'd not heard of it, Ryan?
Yeah, I definitely heard of it.
So Patrick hadn't heard it. Ryan, had you seen it before?
Never saw it. It was like really high up on my list to see them.
So there you go. I can give you the now the opportunity. I gave you the gateway to be able to finally watch it. And so Ryan, we'll start with you with opening thoughts. One sentence or so. What did you feel about it?
Yeah, really impressive storytelling. I mean, Billy Wilder's such a master, so I think I can see why it's a film that I still have heard of to this day. It's a really powerful noir and has a lot of layers to it, and it's overall just a really compelling watch.
Okay, Patrick, your opening thought.
I thoroughly enjoyed this film. The dialogue was tight and it felt modern, and the pacing was great.
Both of them usually are good at the shorter opening thoughts, but not so much today. Before I give my opening thought, I do want to give the screening notes because all the classics we screen at my CMSs, my classic movie screenings over the years. Screened this film twice, actually, both in Los Angeles with different groups of people. First was September 27, 2014, and that audience was excited to finally see a movie they'd heard so much about, but they actually wound up feeling a little overwhelmed by a story they felt was pretty obvious. And the second screening was about a year and a half ago, September 14th, 2018, in which the audience was much more appreciative, surprised as Ryan was at how well it holds up. For my taste, I personally feel like it's a great piece of storytelling executed with precision and detail, and that sort of echoes almost what Ryan said. I prepared it ahead of time. I didn't mean to copy him exactly.
I got it.
Great minds. So we usually start with the strongest element of the film and then work our way back. But there's so many strong elements to this movie, I actually don't know where to begin. So do you guys have a preference of what you feel between direction, performances, screenplay, what you feel was the strongest that you want to talk about first?
If
not,
I'll speak to direction.
What's that?
I think. Direction.
Billy Wilder, to Ryan's point earlier, is a natural storyteller, and he fell into directing very easily. In only his third major feature, he displayed an innate ability to block scenes for the camera in a natural, fluid way that still winds up being cinematic. There's this good example there's a scene in which Phyllis shows up in Walter's apartment and then overhears their nemesis Keys is also in the apartment. So when Keys comes out, she hides behind the door and sort of gently tugs at it to let him know that she's there. That, ladies and gentlemen, is great subtle direction. He falls into great shots quite naturally. Like, he doesn't force the blocking into great shots. He lets the blocking do what it does and then figures out great shots after that. I think it's very beautifully executed. So guys, first, in terms of blocking for camera, how do you feel?
I was wrapped up in it. Maybe I'm watching too many of these older movies, but it felt like it wasn't too slow. Like, some of these movies are just too slow. They hang on their angles too much. The way he blocked it, the way he was directing the people within the camera, it all felt like the story was moving.
The amount of edits is probably the same, but he manages to make the action move within the frame. Like, he doesn't cut faster than a lot of directors at the time, but the dialogue is snappier, as you intimated earlier, and the way the characters move within the frame makes it feel a little more crackling. Ryan, blocking for camera.
Yeah, I was really impressed. Obviously, you could see people like Spielberg took a lot from Billy Wilder because he just has so much happen in such a simple way, even going from the anklet on the leg, going down the stairs, panning over to the door, and letting that play out. There's like a scene where, you're kind of seeing one thing play out, and then he turns to the camera for a specific reveal, and it's like a payoff that's pretty impressive and a use of the frame and frame space. So I feel like in general, I was really, really impressed with what he was doing with the camera, how he was using the actors, because, I was paying attention in the beginning, but eventually it just sweeps you in. And I think that's really what it comes down to, is like, it's just really an immersive form of storytelling. And there was a quote I read with Hitchcock was saying, he's like, you only need to know 2 words for cinema. And he said, Billy and Wilder. It's so clear he's such a master. And having seen a lot of his other work, it's just, his work is timeless, really. And I feel like more people should watch his stuff.
Particularly impressive in the sense that this is only his third feature, but he was worked under he wrote a lot of films for Ernst Lubitsch and learned a lot of blocking in particular from Lubitsch and comic timing as well. In fairness, Wilder has some clunkers out there, which maybe I'll get to on Monday when I do my top 5 Billy Wilder films. For as many clunkers, he's also got films that are all-time classic. He's got three films on my top 100 of all time. So yeah, for sure. But back to Double Indemnity. I would say that shot selection is another, and Ryan, you were sort of alluding to this. I think shot selection was another thing that was really impressive throughout his films, including this one. There's an economy of shots, just enough to tell the story with some occasional great, unusual ideas. And I think a good example is when, during the actual murder, he plays that out on a close-up of Stanwyck's face. It solves any potential censor issues that he might have, so it has a practical application, but it also winds up being highly effective and cinematic. There was also great depth in many of the frames, utilizing the full image without ever making you feel like he's manipulating it. Everything just flows. It makes it look awfully easy. Ryan, do you agree with that?
Yeah, I was even kind of being more wary of how he was covering scenes, and he would hold on like a 2-shot featuring one actor, and I'm like, oh, I'm interested to see if he does, and he does get the other shot, the reverse on it. But that's essentially all he needs. He doesn't ever get like the close up. He just kind of like lets the master play out, and he'll add like one shot to kind of give us a little bit of pacing difference and like to get some specific moments. But they're always so strategically placed. Right when I'm like, oh, this is running a little too long, he'll cut in. It almost is like he's waiting for that perfect moment to kind of break up his shots.
It's so precise, and yeah, I mean, like, he doesn't use a lot of close-ups generally, but when he does, it's usually a very impactful kind of moment. Like, he knows exactly when to punch in like that. Patrick, what do you think?
Nothing about it took me out. I really enjoyed it. I was wrapped up in it. My favorite part, which I'm sure we'll get to, is the dialogue. But yeah, no, I think his shot selection. I was saying that earlier. I felt like nothing. It was just enough. It wasn't slow. It moved well with the story.
The other aspect of direction that I thought was pretty interesting was the way he utilized tone in this one. I mean, it's an extremely consistent and on brand for early film noir. It's cynical and subversive, especially with its attitudes towards sexuality. From John Seitz's elegantly high contrast cinematography to Miklos Rosa's omnipresent, haunting score, all the departments were on the same page, which I think is a sign of a competent vision at the helm. So, Patrick, as the resident composer, do you want to comment on the score or anything that I had to say about tone?
No, I think you're right about the score. The score, I felt like you could lift it and put it in a similar movie right now. I really feel like after this movie, I looked it up. I was like, how many times has this movie been remade? Because it feels like a story that could come out right now. But musically, I actually really liked it from the very beginning. So, I think tone-wise, they did a really good job.
I don't know if it's ever been remade. It's so iconic.
Once, or it's just a movie with the same title in '73 or something or other like that.
It's one of those movies that you'd be surprised if it's remade. Like if Casablanca was remade, like really remade, it would be like, really? Why?
Right.
One thing I would say about the story that you're talking about is, these pulpy novels. It was based on a novel by James Cain. They were definitely prevalent in the culture at the time, and movies were starting to catch up. And you can see it even by the poster behind me. It was sort of sold as sort of like a sexy potboiler, even though it's so much more than that. It's not that there weren't movies like that before it. It just did it better. Ryan, tone.
Billy Wilder always finds those honest comedic moments throughout. I was trying to think back on the score, and I really wasn't much paying much attention to it, meaning that it was fully immersive, and I didn't ever find myself questioning it. I feel like it all played, and nothing really bumped for me. I was completely on board from kind of the beginning. I really bought what the movie was selling tonally.
Last thing about direction that I wanted to talk about was, we often talk about one of the frequent barometers of great direction is the performances in their totality. And almost everybody in this film, to my mind, is really, really good, on point and on tone, thorough and believable. Now, and here's my first bud of the evening, if there's any weakness in this and several other Wilder films, and I'm curious, with having a Wilder background, if Ryan agrees with this, some of the very small parts, some of the day playing parts, tend to be a little broad, frequently the comic relief. In this film, the guy from Medford, Oregon is a good example. And another example in this film is the insurance boss, who's weirdly named Edward Norton. The lead performances are amazing. Some of the side performances, the smaller parts, are slight bumps for me. If there is something to complain about with this movie, those would be a couple of the things. Ryan, what do you think?
I mean, I personally was laughing at how ridiculous the guy was. To me, I felt like it was a much-needed levity. Also in the grocery store, there's the woman that's they always put stuff on the top shelf.
I didn't mind her. I didn't mind her. It felt very natural to me. But Medford Oregon guy felt a little bit kitschy.
Yeah, I mean, it didn't bump for me. I thought it was pretty funny. I thought it was a bit ridiculous, but I thought that was I don't know, I felt that was in line with what he was intending from that guy.
I agree, because it seems like it's almost a character from Some Like It Hot. You know what I mean? Right. It feels like it's part of other Wilder films and not necessarily this one.
Yeah, that's fair. I think to me it was probably he thought it was funny, and I definitely thought it was funny too. I agree with you on the main performances. I mean, obviously, I think it's just there's some incredible performances here, and especially the chemistry between the two leads. Like you have to really buy it immediately within like a couple scenes, and I think he did a really good job of in his casting of getting these two leads to really play off each other. Um, and you have that like one rebel dude, and even the young girl, like everybody seemed to be. And it's funny you say the insurance guy. I actually really did like him, the Edward, I guess Edward Norton character,
Edward Norton, that was his name. I swear it.
who moonlights as a Fight Club guy. No, I liked him. I liked him. He seemed pretty like. But who is what's the name of his main like kind of opposition? What's the name of that guy?
Barton
His name. That guy specifically stood out to me as like just a really, really great, especially in the insurance scene where he just kind of took the power back in.
I want to talk about the individual performance momentarily, but before I do that, I want to get Patrick's feedback on the performances in their totality and also who he agrees with in terms of these smaller performances that I found a little broad.
I think they gave some natural likeness to the film, and nothing about the guy on the train really ruined it for me. You know, he was just kind of like a funny bystander. I didn't feel like anything really took me away from it.
I mean, I certainly don't want to suggest that it ruined it for me. It was just one of those.
Yeah. Because it was so small. The grocery store people were pretty funny. No one really took me out.
Oh, and I do want to point out, in terms of chemistry, I did want to explain that you talked about Billy Wilder's casting, but he didn't really have that much power yet, only in his third film. Remember, in the studio systems, these directors were assigned their stars. They didn't so much pick them as they were assigned by the studio heads. And Fred MacMurray and Barbara Stanwyck had done a film 4 years earlier, I think it was 4 years earlier, called Remember the Night, a film that takes place on New Year's Eve. They had showed some chemistry there, and so that's why they were repaired on this particular project. He would work with Fred MacMurray again in 1960 for The Apartment. Speaking of Fred MacMurray, let's start with him in terms of performances. Like, most people remember Fred MacMurray from his Disney films like Absent-Minded Professor and Shaggy Dog, and that's sort of become his legacy. But before that, he had the potential to be a very important leading man in the late 30s, early 40s, and he's super engaging as Walter Neff. He handles Waters' smart alecky dialogue with confident panache and makes it his own. His character plays things close to the vest, as was the masculine way of the time and in the genre. But MacMurray still manages to communicate his character's every fear, every thought, every emotion without tipping his hand too much. And it offers us more insight than the dry voiceover does. Fred MacMurray. Patrick.
The first scene, I was taken aback by how hard this dude was going after a married woman. His way of like full court press in another man's house.
She was really hot.
But he went hard, man. So I was like, wow, this dude is bold. But he played a bold character very well, right? You know?
We're not talking about his performance right now. We're really talking about his character motivation. I would suggest that the way that she came out in a towel and the way she sort of approached him, I would say left, if not a green light, certainly an amber one.
Yeah. I don't know if she was trying to seduce him right away. I don't know. Maybe that's just her character. Maybe she's just a flirtatious person. It felt like she was figuring out the details of this murder while he was there. But the setup in the very beginning was a little strange. Why they were going after each other so hard. He played a homewrecker very, 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 very well, believing.
Yeah, I mean, he didn't seem to necessarily care about the consequences to other people. There was certain selfishness with which he approached a lot of his choices, and you bought that. Does that sum it up?
Yeah, exactly.
Ryan, Fred MacMurray.
Yeah, I mean, I thought he did a really great job. I forgot that it was him in the apartment. It wasn't. He's not one of them. What is he in the apartment?
He's the boss, the one that Shirley MacLaine is so upset about.
Right. I definitely bought him from the opening scene. He just seemed really dropped in. It seemed like it came naturally to him. I do agree with it. I did feel like I was like, man, this guy needs to chill out. Like he needs to respect his house a little bit more. I did feel that thing. Like, man,
he's so clever when he does it.
And that was the thing. Like they played with it a little bit with like the chemistry of the younger girl, and you're like, oh, is he now going for her too? Like this guy seems like he has no limits. But I think they knew that, and they were playing with that on purpose for him to kind of ultimately have his character arc pay off.
He was planning to set up Sarketti and then bails on that. And so he has this sort of arc where he starts to think about other people outside of himself and Keyes. But Ryan, I'm unclear about, do you like his performance?
No, I did.
Okay.
I thought he did a great job. I didn't see anything that stood out to me as untruthful, especially like on such a kitschy idea as like starting on a confession. You know what I mean? It's very easy to overplay that. And obviously like he's coming in hot at the beginning, and and it's kind of like he's sweating and all these things. But I felt like, yeah, I really bought the urgency and I bought the emotion of it. And I think the payoff, I think he did a good job.
Coming in hot, he says. Speaking of coming in hot, Barbara Stanwyck, the sole acting Oscar nominee of the film, and was considered one of the greatest never to win an Oscar, possibly the biggest female star of the decade, or at least top 5. She takes a chance here playing a role dripping with sexuality and hate. And just look at the aforementioned shot during the actual murder to know what a great actress she is. Underplaying it before that was in vogue. It's an extremely evocative and memorable moment, her reaction during the actual murder. Her character has moments of vulnerability in the film, particularly late in the film, but a careful viewer can decipher that as faux vulnerability. Acting like a character who's acting can be a tricky thing. How convincing do you want the character to be? And I think she achieves that balance beautifully. She manages a surprising arc over the course of the film, setting a new bar for the femme fatale character that frequents this film noir genre. They aren't often as layered as they are here. Barbara Stanwyck, ladies and gentlemen.
So it was a little bit of a stretch for me that she didn't care about anybody at the very end. So maybe her performance wasn't as believable to me that she was actually a cold driver of this whole thing. She was still a cold person. I always felt like she had maybe a little bit of feelings for Walter.
I mean, I think she did, and I think that's part of her arc where she surprises herself.
Well, no, she says she only cared about him. She only realized she cared about him after she couldn't kill him at the very end. So after she shot him once, and then she couldn't shoot him again.
One thing you have to buy that this guy would go to these lengths for a girl. She definitely is alluring, and you're kind of curious about her. And then 2 is the things start coming out one after the other. You start to realize, wait, oh, she probably did have a hand in the mother. She probably did have a hand in all this, and it was believable to me that this woman pulled this off, because then you start to realize, oh, all those moments that you thought were sincere, they were just there was a purpose to them. I agree with you. I think that her saying that doesn't necessarily mean it's true. I think for anybody like her, she has to believe it herself to make anybody else believe it. She's just saying that at the end to really try and hurt him by saying, I never cared about you. But I think it's very apparent that she did care about him at the end. But he was pretty ruthless.
I think he just wanted to kill people. I don't know. They had sex maybe once. I think he was just bored. Let's have some excitement in my life. Maybe I can make some money.
Patrick, let's put a pin in that, actually, because I don't know if I disagree. Ryan, anything else on Barbara Stanwyck?
No, I think it's very clear why she was a star of the time. I mean, she was a great leading lady.
So cool, guys. And Ryan, you talked about this last performance already. And in our 1942 in review, I named Edward G. Robinson the best actor of 1942 for his comedic work in the film Larceny, Inc. In this film, he delivers what I think is the best performance of his career in what should have won the Oscar for Best Supporting Actor, let alone should have been nominated. He was not nominated, but he was easily, to me, the best performance of 1944, at least in the supporting category. He creates a fascinating, complex, entertaining, and interesting character in insurance investigator Barton Keyes. He has a speech midway through the movie that Ryan already alluded to about actuarial tables in which he kills it, owning every word. So much detail to his performance, but he's so natural that you barely notice that he's doing, all the little details. He feels so real with tons of little choices that add up to create a complete character. Edward G. Robinson has never received an Oscar nomination, ladies and gentlemen, and he should have won one here and possibly in 1942 as well. Guys, Ryan, you'd already talked about it. I'll let you go first. Edward G. Robinson is Barton Keyes.
Yeah, I agree. I think he's still every scene he was in. I mean, you have to really buy that his competence. That's the stakes of the whole movie, right? And he has really one scene at the beginning to establish that. He talks about the little man inside that he's listening to, and you feel it when he's on his side at the insurance head, where you're like, oh man, that's cool. Look at what happens when he's on your side. But then when he starts to kind of poking holes, you're like, oh, he's done. There's no way he's getting away from this guy. And I think all of that's played out in such a masterful way. The power of the ending is exclusively on his performance. Obviously, it's both of them in it together, but it's the payoff of everything. And yeah, you just can't look away when he's on screen. I think he was definitely my favorite performance in the movie. One
of the greatest ever, never to be nominated for an Oscar. Patrick, Edward G. Robinson.
I loved him. I love his character. The scenes that we're just talking about where we don't really know if Edward is on the side of our lead characters. That also has to do with the score, how the score kind of made you feel like something was about to happen. There was one line, I don't know whether I was dreaming or not, where he's like, I don't have the matches in my pocket because they explode in my pocket.
Right.
The whole time he's kind of playing everyone else, like, where's my matches? He never carries the matches.
Put a pin in that as well. You're poking holes in all the stuff I've got coming up. let's put a pin in that one because
Can I talk, baby?
There's a very specific reason for that line that I'll get to later. And interesting enough, I mean, like Edward G. Robinson, like Ryan, you talked about the opening scene where he talks about the little man, and that scene had the potential to be very expositional, and I feel like his performance saves that scene. You know what I mean? He actually like saves the screenplay through his performance and making that potential for exposition feel very natural and fluid. Which leads me to the screenplay, which was two of the greatest writers of the 20th century combined to write this very taut, detailed screenplay. I'm talking about Billy Wilder, of course, specialized in screenplays, but and also Raymond Chandler, who specialized in the film noir genre, creating the famous Philip Marlowe character. And Raymond Chandler has a slight cameo in the movie, early in the movie, in the insurance office. It's cute. But anyway, that's some big-time names. Billy Wilder wasn't as big-time a name as Raymond Chandler was at the time. The plot is all Chandler. That's what makes this better than most of the genre, is the details that Chandler brings to the table. Things like the paper in the doorbell and the car wash to give him an alibi. It was all so well thought out, and those little things add up to give the story texture and believability. Chandler also does a good job of creating believable obstacles for the perfect plan of our ostensible heroes. That's what keeps us engaged. And the beautifully descriptive voiceover is also very Chandler. The dialogue, however, that Patrick's already alluded to, is all Wilder. It's crackling, smart, funny, cynical, clever. Perhaps more importantly, in all its cleverness, the words also offer additional interesting insight into each of the characters. One of the trademarks of Wilder's scripts is the repeatable lines or moments, which are kind of satisfying, especially when certain repeated things come to have different meanings over the course of the film. How the phrase straight down the line morphs from a euphemism for I love you into a threat. And how constantly lighting Keyes' cigar turns around at the end. That, to me, is beautiful writing. So I have some quibbles with the screenplay coming up. But before I do, guys, let's talk about the plot and the dialogue. Patrick, you've already alluded to the dialogue.
A memorable line, he's like, Neff, like Philadelphia with two F's or something like that. He said something like, Philadelphia doesn't have two F's. It's just ridiculous.
It also leads to a reference to a popular movie at the time, because he's like, haven't you heard the story? And she's like, what? And he's like, the Philadelphia Story, which was a movie that came out a few years before that. So that's even just like a in-joke reference of the time.
Right. He's just saying stuff. So he dizzies this girl, and he's just a salesman as well. So he's got that gift of gab, but he's definitely but he doesn't come off as a fast talker. He's just a witty talker. It's like he definitely has smart things to say.
The cleverness makes you like the characters more. Ryan, what do you think?
I think a lot of they stayed away from a lot of traps that I feel like a lot of people could fall into, especially one specific moment with the car not starting. And it's like they really relied, as opposed to obstacles in the way, they relied on strong opposition, meaning like an actual person chasing them down as opposed to just like a hurdle coming in their way. They alluded to like the car not starting. They lived in that moment just to kind of see how the characters would react. They're like, no. They actually have thought this out. Whereas in a lot of lesser movies, I think, would just be like, oh, the car didn't start. Because remember, they didn't fill it with gas, and it's like, that's stupid.
Except they forgot about the cast. They forgot to think about why wouldn't he put a claim in.
I believe that you wouldn't think about that because they're so busy thinking about the picture. And I think, but the plan itself was a very cool heist. And I think just like the great heist movies, they keep the audience in the dark because you're just eager to see what each step. And then when you're like, oh, I get it. They have the body and that's what they're going to do. You're like, oh, that's pretty smart. They've really thought all that through. And then there's moments like when she calls on the payphone and she's like, I'm going to come up. But then right that moment, Key like shows up on the door and you're like, oh, man. And you know that that's coming. It's like a ticking time bomb, which also adds more weight to the scene that's currently happening. So I think a lot of these builds and payoffs are really well executed. And obviously on the scene level, the car one you talked about with the flirting, that was such a great back and forth. You know what I mean? Even though obviously he's like coming on way too strong, but like he handles it pretty well with that car metaphor. And you're like, okay, all right, she might be married, but you know, he's a pretty smooth talker.
Okay, do you have a favorite line of dialogue, Ryan?
I think it was probably the car exchange. That one really stood out to me.
My favorite sort of comes at the end of that when he makes another sort of like, you know, suggestive remark, and she says, I wonder if I know what you're talking about. And he says, I wonder if you wonder.
This guy is smooth as peanut butter, man. He's the man. I don't know why he's being this way. He's in another man's house talking about, will your husband be there? I'm like, whoa, bro, what are you doing?
We always like the confident characters, so he brought some of that to the table. Keys also has a great line when he thinks that Walter has a girlfriend named Margie. He's like, I bet she drinks from the bottle.
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
so good. The other thing that's pretty good about the screenplay, I think, is the way it deals with the relationships. Ryan's talked about the relationship between Walter and Phyllis. But to me, the real relationship of the movie is actually between Keys and Walter. They love each other in a very non-sexual way, and it's a relationship that was rare to see in a film of the time. You'd see brotherhood, but not necessarily this level of mutual respect and admiration. They're aware of it, but they can only address it in a joking or mocking way until the end is at hand, of course. It's a beautiful twist in a movie that has so much heterosexual heat in it. Relationships in the movie, particularly Keys and Neff.
They had a strong relationship in my book. That wasn't the problem. I have other relationship problems in the movie, but I did feel like their kind of bromance was believable, and it pushed the story. It helped with the tension between Neff's betrayal. It was a very strong friendship. I
want to get back to the issues you alluded to having, but before we do, Ryan, what do you think about Keys and Neff?
Yeah, I mean, they both bonded over the fact that they really pride themselves in their work, and I think that both of them were like, oh, why aren't you married kind of thing. And both of them were just, their identity was related to, one, him being a salesman, two, him being able to like sniff out fake insurance claims. And I think that's because to them, that was their life mainly,
They felt like they were the smartest people. Like, they can talk to each other at an intellectual level.
Right. Yeah. And I think, even when he makes up this fake girlfriend, you have this kind of snide remarks made against her, right? To kind of undercut her. Kind of like that classic bro thing where it's like, oh, you don't need that girl, like it's just the two of us kind of thing.
Bros before hoes. Patrick, what relationships did you have a problem with?
I don't get why he would do this for a woman that he just met off of the street. Now, once the movie picked up and they started getting into their plan, I was like, all right, I'm going to suspend that. I mean, there's a lot of pretty girls out there. You're not just going to go into someone's house and murder her husband just because she asked.
That's another thing I want to put a pin in because I think it relates to the T word. If you're willing to be patient with me, I think I have a response for you.
All right. You want me to just wait until the end to talk, bro?
You keep pinpointing things that I've got coming up. I respect that. I think it's very specific what the film is trying to do here. And I think something relates to what was going on, in the culture at the time. I have a quick quibble about the screenplay. The structure is interesting and in which Wilder applies a Wellesian kind of approach to the narrative, which he would use again in Sunset Boulevard, which basically tells you most of the story right up front. And at the 2014 screening, Devin was at that screening at my house here, and he suggested that made the rest of the movie feel obvious and thus less engaging. I never felt that, though. Yes, we know what's going to happen, but the movie then becomes about the how, and I don't think it suffers as a result. There was also the suggestion that we never get to know Neff really before we're thrown into the story, which was disconcerting. They felt like he wasn't well established enough. And the other little quibble that I have relates to perspective. And one of the chief tenets of the film noir is a limited perspective. That is, we only see what the hero sees, so we can sort of follow the mystery along with him or her. And this film mostly follows that, but at the very end, we shift to Phyllis' perspective only for about 30 seconds, but it was enough to bother me. It's a small quibble in an otherwise great film, but it's additionally bothersome because it's so unnecessary. We don't need to see her plant a gun. It's a rare moment of Wilder not trusting his audience, I think. There's a few things there, guys. There's the perspective. There's the characterization of Walter. Did we not get to know him soon enough? The third thing is the idea of telling basically what happens up front. Any issues with any of those things?
No, I actually really liked how they did the narrators. I know that's like a normal thing, but I thought they did it well.
But specifically, he basically told you it was a murder. Check. You basically know what's going on in advance.
Yeah, no, I had no problem with that. Because you're right. You just don't know how. I didn't feel like they gave too much. I was too curious about details of the crime.
I had heard about this film, so I was like, okay, I'm curious what is it about this film that gets so much acclaim? I didn't really ever question it. I was like, oh, that is interesting. Like, why would I watch this then, in a sense? I feel like within the first 10 minutes, I was kind of thinking that, and then I just completely lost it. I was like, okay, I'm great. Initially, I felt like a little bit thrown off. I trusted the movie to kind of get me there.
I talked about how some of the audience members at the 2018 screening felt like they wanted to know more about Walter before they were thrust into the mystery. They wanted to get more of his sense of his character before he meets Phyllis, or before like we're on to the story. Anything to that?
Yes. I think his motivations. It would have been great to because I don't buy that he just fell in love with this girl. Maybe he was broke. Maybe he just broke up with his wife. Maybe he was lovesick. You know, maybe there was something else that was of a driver to. I mean, you hooked up with this girl once. You're gonna get the gas chamber. It's crazy.
Ryan, do you agree?
I didn't really find that. Like, I think I was saying I trusted the movie to kind of give me what I needed, and I think throughout the course, I feel like I do understand kind of what was driving him. I think it relates back to the relationship between Key or whatever. Yeah, I mean, obviously, it would have been a different pacing thing if you'd had that in there, but I kind of like just how it dives in, and then you see the girl and you're like, okay. I guess to me, it's the big thing about the payoff. If they're going to go this route, then they have to make a really good payoff. And I do feel like the payoff does live up to what it was building. So I just kind of waited to judge the movie until I watched the end. But I was like, all right, you better have, if you're doing it this way and you're telling me the ending up front, it better be good.
It saves some twists for the end. But I mean, one thing in terms of the characterization, I agree with you, Ryan. It's sort of like they jumped right in, but I mean, like it sort of felt like they were peeling away. Like we got to know Walter as we went along, kind of thing. And I have some theories as to why he did what he did, which we'll get into momentarily. But before we do, is there anything to my complaint? Those were other people's complaints at the screening. My issue was a small bump, you know, that keeps this from being an A+ to an A. Like, I don't know. They shifted perspective. It was so weird that we all of a sudden saw inside Phyllis's house with Walter not being there. Did anybody else care?
No. I mean, how else are you going to explain that she has a gun under her seat?
Do you need to know that she just brings it out? Like, I think it's totally in character if she just brought it out.
Well,
I don't think we need it.
She's not like a gunslinger. She hasn't been like carrying a gun on her hip.
Threatened him, you know, so you must know that there's something to that. You know, she probably wants him dead, you know, or has thought about killing him.
I don't know enough about noir movies to know that they switched that, so it didn't feel like anything different. I mean, now that you're saying that, it kind of makes sense.
Even if it's not just a noir movie, I mean, like every scene we're with Walter except for that 30 seconds. Ryan, am I making any sense? Or am I just talking junk?
It didn't bump for me when I watched it, but I can definitely see where you're coming from. It just didn't affect me in the same way.
Cool. Well, I mean, this was your first time watching it. It's probably my 50th time watching it too. So maybe, like that is something to do with it as well. Patrick has so many things that I keep telling him to put a pin in. So I'm going to move on so we can get to those things. Patrick, you ready?
I don't even remember what we were saying. So hopefully
I'll help you out because it's time for the T word, ladies and gentlemen. This is the section where we talk about the themes of the movie. I've got a couple themes for this movie, and the first one is an interesting one in the sense that I think this movie is about sex. Not the act of it, but the power of it and the potential of it can have over us and our actions. We joke about men that are thinking with their penis, but it's a very real and a very common thing. We've all had those moments, and while this is an extreme situation, to Patrick's point, it's not that far out of the realm of possibility. And although Walter and Phyllis throw around words like I love you, I think it's abundantly clear, both in terms of their performances and the direction, that there's not as much of an emotional connection here. It's purely sexual. And the film uses iconography to hammer home this point, like the aforementioned anklet itself, and the matches that he carries around. At one point, Keyes talks about he doesn't really bother with women anymore, and then later explains why he doesn't carry matches. They always explode in his pocket. The matches then become a stand-in for women, and Neff's latest match was exploding in his pocket big time. The film almost cynically suggests that we may be better off with non-sexual same-gender relationships like the safe love that Keyes and Neff have for each other. Given the sexual suppression of the era, the need and the drive for sex was a lot higher and therefore more combustible. The potential for regrettable decisions, even one this extreme, was a lot higher. That's why I buy it. So ultimately, I think the film suggests devaluing of sex. which eventually would be achieved by making it less taboo as history would go on. Sex is great, but not essential to a happy life, and certainly not worth throwing away one's life for the way that Neff does. That's my theory. What do you think?
I mean, you said the theory, and you kind of undercut the validity of it, because sex isn't worth what he was throwing away for it.
I mean, I think that's the point of the movie, but I'm saying obviously the characters are putting a higher value on it, especially given the sexual suppression of the era. That's my point.
The movies were trying to prevent things from getting worse. People were still always having just as much sex as today, right?
It's more than they lead us to believe in the movies. But I also think that there was a greater stigma, especially for women. They had less agency over their bodies at the time. So there was a greater stigma to having sex. Ryan, do you have anything on what I just said?
I mean, I have a different theme that I think really kind of explains what everyone's coming from. I do think that there definitely is that element of the suppression and that kind of allure. And I do think that that's the main thing that she uses as a power over the other character. To me, there was another thing throughout that kind of was the underlying current of it.
Here's one more, and let's see if it's the same one. Patrick also sort of alluded to this one because he's way ahead of me all the time. The other theme, I think, is ennui, E-N-N-U-I. I'd also suggest that it's not just the sex that drives Neff. I think there's a suggestion that the idea of committing the perfect murder is kind of exciting in its own right, tying together the rush of sex with the rush of violence. Neff is portrayed as your everyman insurance salesman, not a schlub per se. He's a smart guy, clever, bold, as Patrick has said. He's a good salesman that makes a decent living, but he's nothing special. Whatever he is, he's not enough to feel alive. And you know what they say about idle hands. I think Neff was bored, and I think Patrick even used that word, and saw in Phyllis an opportunity not just to have a woman of that stature, or a woman so in touch with her own sexuality, but also an opportunity to challenge himself to do something dangerous, and in doing so, to outwit his colleague and friend Keyes like no one else has. He's drifting aimlessly through life. He seizes this opportunity to be something more for once, again suggesting that maybe our boring lives are not that boring after all. Maybe appreciating what we do have can make for a happier and safer existence. So, guys, both of you, like Patrick, you already talked about the boredom. Ryan, you talked about having a potential other theme that you thought about. Does this touch either what you guys were talking about?
For me, definitely. And that's where I think a little bit of exposition beforehand, like maybe he's bored, or maybe there's something about it that would help us drive this point home or something. But I definitely think he wanted to try to outsmart the system. He wanted to try to prove something potentially to himself or to the girl, to whoever he would tell in 40 years about this. It was just about boredom. It wasn't necessarily about money. It wasn't necessarily about sex. It was all those things wrapped up into like him doing something big with his life.
Ryan, sounds like you had a different idea altogether.
No, I mean, this is in line with it. Mine was more about hubris, how each character was kind of driven, testing the grounds for how far they can push. And I think she tested it with the mother and kind of saw, okay, I could go even further with this, and even going further with bringing in a new person and like, basically just kind of never stopping at one thing and kind of always trying to push for more. And that's what ends up being her downfall. The same with him. If he just pulled off a normal insurance claim for the $50,000, I don't think it would have been as big of an issue. It's the fact that it was the $100,000 double indemnity, which is what ends up getting him caught. What was driving him also, I mean, when you hear it in the opening scene, is that relationship that we talked about earlier. It's like these two characters, and he's offered to be the guy's assistant. And he's going to turn that down, obviously, because he doesn't view himself as an assistant. He views himself as the top salesman and one of the smartest people in the building, where the other guy also views himself as the smartest person in the building, but his own hubris couldn't let him see that the person right next to him was the one. Each character is kind of like about trying to outsmart each other, you know what I mean? And ultimately, he tries to outsmart our female in the whole thing by saying, like, I know your plan. I know what you're going to do next. But then eventually he pulls the plug on it all because he realizes the destruction that he's caused.
I really like that theme, and I do agree. I think it is in line with what I was saying about ennui. I think they sort of go hand in hand in the sense that the boredom creates this hubris because they keep needing to push themselves to feel alive, to feel something, because otherwise they're just sort of going through the motions. I like that theme very much, and I do think that they're connected. But Patrick was making a face.
Yeah. Well, no. I just had a question for the group. Why the hell did he confess?
Why do you think he confessed?
I don't know.
Okay, I certainly have an idea, but I'll let Ryan answer.
I think it's the same reason that serial killers confess. I've watched too much Mindhunter recently, but it's like it's to really be seen as the genius you are. Like again, it was that moment at the end where he could look him in the face and say, I outsmarted you. You didn't catch me. I had you outwitted, and I literally was going to pull this off until I came in here, and I had to confess for you.
He didn't have to confess. The dude was there with security. He broke into his office. Didn't Edward's character know at that point? Like,
not until he heard him confess. He was going to arrest that other kid.
Oh,
I think.
Oh yeah, he was going to arrest him.
And then the janitor called him in. The janitor called him in.
Oh
He
yeah.
said that this crazy.
My theory is he grew up, and Ryan sort of alluded this. This is his journey. This is his character journey, and this is him sort of coming around and realizing the destruction that he's causing. That was very common for criminals. Bad guys have to get their comeuppance in the end. So that was definitely something that was going to happen. And yeah, I think that's the character journey. Is he gets rid of Phyllis, and then Nino, he realizes Nino's innocent and decides to spare Nino and turn himself in because it's the right thing to do. He becomes the moral monster inside us gets the best of him.
Yeah.
No moral monster inside Patrick. No need to worry about that.
Yeah, that's all. You killed a woman. You killed the husband. You take that to the grave. What are you doing?
Duly noted, Patrick.
I think the moral thing stopped him from getting the other kid involved, but I do think it was him being like, I have to get this all on record because I'm so brilliant. That's what I thought.
Part and parcel to the hubris. I think he does have this journey because sparing Nino is huge. He could have gotten away with it if he'd let Nino get arrested.
Right.
Yeah, who cares about Nino? Nino seemed like a little bit.
Nino's a douchebag.
Being a nice guy does not mean you need to be arrested for murder. He's not a nice guy, but he was innocent.
He's guilty of something, man.
Guys, that's not the point. Clearly, he's not guilty of 2 murders.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Don't let me get involved in a scheme with these guys. So guys, it is time for the classic movie showdown. And this is one of the most popular things that we do, in which we have movies go head-to-head in NCAA style brackets. Patrick's going to read you the rules of the classic movie showdown so you know what's going on. Patrick, take it away.
Number 1, seating criteria varies from bracket to bracket. Number 2, films at JB-hosted screenings need to be 15 years or older. Voters are eligible if they see both films within a 12-month period. Voters must see both films in JB's presence. JB is ineligible to vote, but breaks ties.
There you go. Thank you very much, Patrick. Patrick has not been to some screenings, but Ryan certainly has.
Yep.
Remember, guys, we're on audio too sometimes on iTunes and Spotify, so some verbal confirmation every now and then is useful. All right, guys, the vote was at the 2018 screening, not the 2014 screening, for what it's worth. So that's where this vote happened, and we are in the 40s bracket tonight. So that's a bracket of all the very best films of the 40s. Double Indemnity is an 8 seed. Does anybody follow college basketball enough to know what it goes up against in the first round? An 8 seed goes up against a
10 seeds.
Nope.
11.
9.
What's that, Ryan?
9 seed.
9 seed. 8, 9. The closest matchup you can have in a first round. It's an 8-9 matchup, and Double Indemnity goes up against one of our 1942 films, Yankee Doodle Dandy. Of course, I named it my number 2 film of 1942, and I also said it should have won the Oscar for Best Picture in 1942 in the 1942 in review. And I also had Jimmy Cagney should have won the Oscar for Best Actor. He did win the Oscar for Best Actor in 1942 for this film. So it's a very popular film. It's a story about composer and showman George M. Cohan, who wrote Grand Old Flag and Give My Regards to Broadway. So that's what Yankee Doodle Dandy is about. For those who haven't seen it, we talked about it at length on our 1942 in review. It was one of those big films. Then the vote already happened, of course. The first thing I do is I let these guys opine on what they would choose if they had voted. So I told you guys what was coming up. Did anybody watch Yankee Doodle Dandy for tonight?
I didn't get the chance to, unfortunately.
So, and have you ever seen it before?
I did
What's
not.
that?
Just for podcast, I did not. I shook my head, but I realized.
Oh, yeah.
No.
So that's a no. No all around. And has anybody seen it before, Yankee Doodle Dandy?
Nope.
Cagney's George M. Cohan. Okay. Well, then we'll get through this pretty quickly. We'll go straight to what the winner is. And here it is, ladies and gentlemen, from September 14th, 2018, I think it was. Double Indemnity versus Yankee Doodle Dandy. The winner was Yankee Doodle Dandy, and a move that surprised me. Musicals get such a bad rap at my screenings. Whenever I screen a musical, people seem to whine or complain. In this case, voters liked both films, so it was a very difficult choice, as it would be with an 8-9, you would hope. It was more about enjoying Yankee Doodle Dandy a little bit more, as if the joy of that biopic musical moved them emotionally a little more than the dark cynicism of Double Indemnity. Yankee Doodle Dandy is toward the bottom of my top 100 list, while Double Indemnity just missed my top 100. So I understand the vote. I like Yankee Doodle Dandy slightly more. I like them both a lot, though. But Yankee Doodle Dandy was a part of my childhood and therefore a little more connected to me personally. Guys, I know you haven't seen Yankee Doodle Dandy, but are you surprised by this vote?
Yeah, a musical beating a sexy noir. I don't know. Maybe it's your audience.
I mean, every audience differs, but yeah, I mean, they're the ones that showed up, Patrick. If you don't show up, you don't get to vote. Ryan, anything on that?
No, I want to see Yankee Doodle Dandy, though.
Obviously, it was a big film for 1942, and I screened it as part of the Oscar movie marathon that we did that year, which would have been in February of 2018. I own it, so if you guys want to borrow it, just let me know.
Cool.
Closing thoughts, guys. Anybody have closing thoughts before we wrap things up?
Closing thought, don't walk into another man's house and try to proposition a woman, because she's probably going to get you in trouble. Cool.
In one way or another.
Don't do it. Don't do it.
That's the moral of the story, to Patrick. That's what he did in this particular movie. Ryan.
If she propositions a murder to you from like day 2 of your relationship, she probably is going to proposition your murder to somebody else, or you're probably gonna die. So stay away.
I think we all understand that we would not get into this same situation as Walter Neff. We would, I would hope that we would not. But in fairness, she was very sexy. I
mean, who would it be for you, JB? You walk into a home selling your classic movies, and and who would have to come down the aisle with a
married?
What married actress would need to go through that you?
I'm too much of a wuss to go through with any sort of murder plot, unfortunately. But and I'm outside an age a little older where sex isn't it's not that big important a deal anymore. I'm going to move on to the trivia for our next classic, which is going to start our 6th season. It'll be our 60th classic, and it'll be our first classic of our 6th season, and it'll be the film that I name as the best film of 1959, and I'll do that in our 1959 review, so make sure you tune on that. February 6, 2020, Patrick will be on that show, in which we look back at the films of 1959, and the film I named the best one will be our next classic on this show. In the meantime, our next show, however, is coming this Monday. It's our 43rd Sound Off. I'm going to do an announcement. I'm going to have book review. Alex is going to do a second run, and I'm going to count down the top 5 Billy Wilder films of all time, and we will see if Double Indemnity makes that list. In the meantime, ladies and gentlemen, this meeting of the No Name Cinema Society is adjourned.